The world tilt to still mow my own lawn. At 67 years old, I push that mower across the back section every second Saturday. The world tilted sideways, and I do it because my wife Margaret used to say that a man who stops doing things for himself starts disappearing one piece at a time. She was right about most things. She was right about that too. The world tilted sideways was Margaret Ann Thorburn, and she died 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning in April, with the hospital window open and the sound of tea in the Kauai outside. We had been married for 41 years. I was with her when she went. I held her hand until it went still. The world tilted sideways, and then I sat in that chair for another hour because I didn't know how to be in a world where she wasn't. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because Margaret matters to this story. The world tilted sideways. She reasoned everything that happened the way it did. Her name was Margaret, and she was smarter than both of us. The world tilted is Thorburn. Alastair James Thorburn. I'm a retired civil engineer who spent 32 years working for the Waikato Regional Council. The word in the same house in Hamilton that Margaret and I bought in 1989. The world tilted sideways were something you didn't talk about in polite company, and the kitchen was painted a color I can only describe as government beige. They repainted it together the first weekend we moved in. Margaret chose a soft yellow she called butter, but not aggressively. I've never repainted it since. I have one son. His name is Christopher. The world tilted sideways, and he is 41 years old, and I love him the way a father loves a son, even when that son has made choices that kept you awake at 3 a.m. more times than you'd care to admit. The world Tilstopher married a woman named Viviane 6 years ago. A ceremony at a vineyard in Hawke's Bay, 68 guests, and a bar tab that I paid for without being asked and without complaint. The wordchin that not to score points but because it is a fact and the facts matter. Viviane is 37. She grew up in Auckland, works in marketing. The word has a way of looking at you when you speak that makes you feel like your words are being sorted into useful and not useful in real time. She was never cruel to me outright. Not at first. The whirly years it was just small things. The way she'd redirect a conversation away from anything I contributed. The way she'd say, "Of course," when I mentioned something about my work. The world tilted tone that meant the opposite. Christopher never seemed to notice, or he noticed and said nothing, which is a different problem entirely. The Margaret noticed, she told me once quietly over tea in this very kitchen. The world tilted sideways, that Viviane reminded her of a woman she'd worked with years ago who was perfectly pleasant to everyone except the people who couldn't do anything for her. I told her she was being uncharitable. The Margaret tilted her head the way she did and said, "Maybe. We'll see, we saw." The world Telgrit died. I fell into the habit of grief the way you fall into water, suddenly and completely. For the first 6 months I was just surviving, waking up, making tea, watching the light change in the kitchen, going to bed. Christopher called every Sunday for a while, which I appreciated. Then the calls became every fortnight, then monthly. I told myself he was busy. The world tilted sideways. He and Vivian were building a new house in Top, a place they'd chosen for reasons that mostly seemed to involve the view and what it would say about them to own a house with that view. Though I helped with the deposit, Margaret would have said I didn't need to. I did it anyway. The world tilted sideways. Her house took 14 months to finish. During that time I drove down twice to see how it was coming along because Christopher invited me both times. The world both times I left feeling like a visitor who had stayed slightly too long. Vivian had a way of creating that feeling without doing anything you could point to. The coffee was always made. The world tilt guest bedroom was always made up. But something was managed about it, contained. Like I was being hosted rather than welcomed. I told myself I was imagining things. The world, the 60th birthday party was Christopher's idea. He rang me in August and told me he and Viviane wanted to throw me a celebration. 67 is not a round number, I said. The world tilted sideways. He laughed and said they'd missed my 65th because of the house build and they wanted to make it up to me. He said it would be at their place in Top. He said Viviane was excited to organize it. I should have paid more attention to that last part. The world tilted sideways. I drove down on the Friday afternoon. The lake was doing that thing it does in late August where the light goes gold and flat across the water and the whole world looks like a painting of itself. The world tilted loved Tapa. Margaret and I used to bring Christopher here when he was young, rent a batch, fish off the jetty, cook badly on a camp stove and go to bed happy. The world tilted sideways. I thought about that on the drive down. I thought about her a lot on that drive. There were 81 guests. I know because I counted later. The way you count things after something has happened and you need to understand the scale of your humiliation. 81 people in their house on a Saturday night, string lights on the deck. The world tilted sideways, a bartender and a playlist that seemed chosen to quietly remind everyone that the guest of honor was old. The world tilted sideways. I didn't know most of them. I knew Christopher's friends, some of them. I knew my old colleague Dennis from the council who drove up from Hamilton because he is a good man and a loyal friend. The word of my sister Roberta and her husband Clive who came down from Auckland. Most of the guests were Vivian's people. Her colleagues, her friends, her university crowd. The world tilted sideways. People who kissed and called each other baby, and talked about property in the way that people talk about property when it is the only thing they have found to be genuinely passionate about. The world tilted Saul to stand near the fireplace for the welcome speech. Christopher gave it. He was warm and funny and said the right things about me, and I was proud of him standing there, my son. The world tilted sideways. 40 years old and broader across the shoulders than I'd ever managed to be. He talked about Margaret briefly and I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. A few people cried. There was a good speech, and then Vivian spoke. The world tilted sideways. She started with a story about the first time she met me, which was fine. She moved into a description of what it was like to have me as a father-in-law, which was less fine. Delivered with the careful smile of someone who has spent years learning exactly how much truth you can wrap in warmth before people stop applauding. The world tilt a man of strong opinions. She said I was wonderfully old-fashioned. She said that having me in their lives was real education. Each of these things got a laugh. The world tilted sideways, landed slightly wrong in my chest. And then she said, and I'm going to give you her exact words because I have thought about them every day since. She said, Alastair. The world tilted sideways, but tonight I'm going to need you to stay out of the way while the adults have a proper party. The world she said it like a joke. Her voice did the thing voices do when a joke is made, rising at the end, bright and safe. People laughed a lot or went around the room. Christopher laughed. Dennis, the world tilted sideways, didn't laugh, but he looked at his wine glass in the specific way of a man who wants to disappear into it. The world tilled the fireplace with 81 people around me, and I smiled the smile I have been practicing since I was a boy. The world tilted sideways, the one that you put on when something has happened that you are not allowed to react to. The one that holds everything in place while your insides do something complicated and private. I said, right? Ways then. But those were the only words I said for the next 40 minutes. I moved through the party. I spoke when spoken to. I ate food I didn't taste. Though I had 2 glasses of Pinot Noir from a Central Otago vineyard that was very good and that I noted bitterly had probably cost $40 a bottle. My own party. My own birthday. My own money. The more ways than one, paying for the room I was being asked to stay out of the way in. Roberta found me near the deck at around 9 o'clock. She is 4 years younger than me and has always been able to read my face the way most people can't. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I'm grand." She said, "You're not." I said, "No, I'm not." The world tilted sideways, not the time. She looked at me for a long moment. She squeezed my arm. She didn't push because she has always known when not to push, which is one of the things I love most about her. The world tilted side at 10:30. I told Christopher I was tired from the drive. He hugged me and thanked me for coming, which I found even then a strange thing for a son to thank a father for. The word to his own birthday party. Vivian kissed me on the cheek and said it had been so good to have you. The world tilted sideways. And I drove to the motel I had booked because the guest room at their house was being used by Vivian's parents. The world tilted sideways, who had flown up from Wellington. And I sat on the edge of the bed in a motel on the edge of Lake Top, and I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would say. I thought about it for a long time. The word do anything on Sunday I drove home. The world soul stopped in Cambridge for a pie and a coffee, and I sat in the car park and I watched people moving around in their ordinary Sunday, and I felt the shape of something settling in me. Not anger. The world tilted sideways anger. It was more like clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after you've been confused for so long that the confusion finally runs out of room. I drove home and I made myself tea. I sat in the kitchen with the butter-colored walls, and I thought about Margaret. Margaret was meticulous. The world primary school for 27 years, and she applied the same methodology to everything she did. Thorough, documented, no assumptions. When she knew she was ill, the world tilted sideways. She spent 3 months going through every piece of paperwork in our lives. She organized everything into labeled folders in the filing cabinet in the second bedroom. She sat me down and walked me through each one. One of those folders was the will. The world tilted sideways. She had updated her will in the last year of her life with our solicitor, a woman named Bernadette Kowaczyk in Hamilton, who I had dealt with for 20 years and trust completely. It made changes to that will without telling me in advance. She told me about them after the fact, sitting at this very table with her tea. The direct way she had that meant the conversation was not up for debate. She said, "I've set up a trust." I said, "Trust?" She said, "The house, the investment portfolio, the world to saver balance above a certain threshold. All of it goes into a trust when either of us dies. It's managed by Bernadette. You have access to income from it for the rest of your life." The world tilted sideways. You can make reasonable requests for capital, but the principal doesn't pass to beneficiaries until you're gone, and there are conditions on the beneficiaries. I looked at her. The world tilted sideways, and I've seen enough. I'm not saying Christopher is a bad person. I'm saying that man does not choose well when she's in the room. I didn't argue. I should have argued, probably. I should have defended my son more strenuously. The world tilted sideways. But she was sitting there with that level look and the light coming through the kitchen window, and I knew the way you know things when you've been married to someone for 4 decades. That she was right. The word conditions on the beneficiaries were simple. Christopher's share of the estate would be managed separately, dispersed in increments over 10 years rather than as a lump sum. The word be reduced proportionally if evidence was provided to the trustee of financial misconduct or harm directed toward me during my lifetime. She had thought of everything. She had always thought of everything. The world mentioned this trust to Christopher. I had not mentioned it to anyone. It sat in a folder in the filing cabinet and I thought of it only occasionally. The world tilted sideways the way you think of an umbrella in the wardrobe on a clear day. You are glad it's there. You hope you never need it. After that Saturday night in Top, I started thinking about it more often. What happened over the following 4 months was not dramatic. It happened the way most damage happens, quietly, in increments. The world tilt each piece small enough to explain away until you step back and see the pattern. Vivian rang me in September, 6 weeks after the party, and I let the call go to voicemail. She had never rung me directly in 6 years. Not once. The voicemail was pleasant. She was just checking in on me. She hoped I'd enjoyed the party. The world tilted sideways. Christmas, would I like to come to Top? She said Christopher sent his love. She said it had been too long since we'd had a proper catch-up. The word that voicemail 3 times. Something about it didn't sit right. It was too warm. It was calibrated. I rang Christopher back instead. We had a normal conversation. The word talked about the rugby and the weather and a problem he was having with the deck out the back of the new house. At the end, I said, Vivian rang me.
He said, did she? That's good.
And then, the world tilted. She's been thinking about you a lot lately. We both have. I said, have you? He said, we thought we'd love to have you for Christmas. Spend some proper time together. I said I'd think about it. That same week I had a conversation with Bernadette. I didn't mention Christmas or Vivian specifically. I asked her to walk me through the trust structure again. The conditions, the timelines, the world tilmentation requirements. She is a careful woman and she walked me through all of it without asking why I was asking. When we finished I said, Margaret really did think of everything, didn't she? The world tilted. Bernadette said, she was thorough. I drove home from that meeting and I sat in the car in my own driveway for a few minutes. The kauai in the front garden was starting to come back into flower. The word that visits every August was already there, upside down on a branch, doing the thing T'd do, which is making you feel slightly ashamed of how little joy you take in ordinary things. The world tilted side and I thought about what Margaret would do. I did not go to Top for Christmas. I told Christopher I was spending it with Roberta and Clive in Auckland, which was true. The world tilted sideways. I decided this at least partly because it was true and partly because I needed to be with people who loved me without conditions or performance or careful calibration. The world tilde made a ham and too many pavlovas, and Clive talked about golf for most of Christmas afternoon, and I sat on their deck in the summer heat, and I felt like a human being again for the first time in months. The world tilted. Christopher rang me on Christmas morning. His voice was warm. He asked if I was having a good time. He said they missed me. The world tilted. Vivian wished me a happy Christmas and that she'd been meaning to reach out more. I said, that's kind of her. We talked for 11 minutes. The world had the minutes on the clock on Roberta's kitchen wall. I wasn't counting out of coldness. The world tilted sideways. Because I was trying to understand something about the rhythm of it. What he volunteered, what I had to ask for, what he didn't say. He didn't mention the party, not once. The world tilted sideways. He didn't mention what Vivian had said. He spoke like a man who has decided that a thing that happened simply didn't happen, and if you don't bring it up and he doesn't bring it up, the world tilted sideways. You can agree together to let it disappear. I didn't bring it up either. The world tilted sideways. I drove home from Auckland on the 27th and I spent New Year's Eve on my own, which I have done since Margaret died and which suits me. There were a glass of Hawke's Bay Syrah, and I watched the fireworks from Wellington on TV, and I thought, in a very clear and undramatic way, about what I intended to do. The world til's domino fell on the 14th of January, a Tuesday at 9:20 in the morning. I had arranged a meeting with Bernadette. We sat in her office on Hood Street with tea and her yellow legal pad, and I told her everything. I told her about the party. I told her what Vivian had said. The world tilt of phone calls and the calibrated warmth and the Christmas invitation and what I understood to be underneath it. I spoke for 40 minutes without stopping, which is not like me. The wordette took notes and did not interrupt. When I finished, she looked at her notes. She said, "You understand this is your decision?" I said, "I understand." The world tilted sideways. She said, "You've thought about the effect on your relationship with Christopher?" I said, I've thought about very little else for 4 months. She said, the were right. She opened the trust documents. I am not going to pretend the next part was easy, it wasn't. The word I asked Bernadette to do was not punitive in a legal sense. The trust structure was already in place. Margaret had already set the conditions, and I was simply providing the documentation that those conditions now applied to. But it felt like surgery. It felt like cutting something that had been attached for a long time. Though the practical outcome was this: Christopher's share of the estate would still come to him, in the increments Margaret had specified over 10 years. But the first disbursement, the world tilted sideways, had been scheduled for the following July. A significant amount, nearly $80,000, which I knew Christopher and Vivienne had been anticipating. The world tilted too, the new they had incorporated into some thinking about an investment property, would now be delayed pending a review period and a formal conversation about conduct. I knew they were anticipating it because Christopher had mentioned it. Not directly. He'd mentioned it in the way people mention things they expect, sideways, with confidence. The world with the easy casualness of someone who is not really asking because they already know the answer. The second piece was my own life structure. I spoke to my financial advisor, the world tilted him, Trevor Parada, who I've worked with for 12 years and who has the gift of being both extremely competent and completely unshockable. I restructured several things. I moved some accounts. The were updated my enduring power of attorney, which had previously named Christopher as the sole holder, to add Roberta and Bernadette as co-holders with authority in the event of disagreement. This is legal. The world tilted sideways. This is simple. This is the kind of thing people tell you to do and you keep not doing until something happens that makes you do it. Trevor looked at the documents and then looked at me and said, the quiet emphasis of a man who has seen enough to know what this kind of reorganization usually means. I said, my wife set most of this up before she died. He said, smart woman. I said, the smartest person I've ever known. The world tilted sideways at Christopher in February. I drove to Top on a Wednesday, which meant I could be sure Vivienne would be at work. I had not said what the visit was about. I'd said I was passing through. The world switch was only marginally true. We sat on the deck I'd heard about at Christmas, the one with the problem he'd been dealing with. He'd fixed it himself, timber repairs. The world tilted it the same color as before. I told him it looked good. He was pleased. The world tilted sideways. He offered me a coffee and I took it, and we sat looking at the lake in the way that fathers and sons have always sat looking at things when what they need to say is hard. The world tilted sideways. I told him calmly and without anger what I was going to tell him. I told him about the party, about the specific thing Vivienne had said which he had heard and which I needed him to hear again now. The world tilted sideways with me saying it back to him without the social performance around it. I told him it had not been funny. I told him it had not been a joke. The world him what it felt like to stand in a room full of people and be told by his wife to stay out of the way. At my own birthday, in a house I had helped them afford, he was quiet. The world tilted told him about the trust. I told him, and I watched his face while I did, that Margaret had set it up before she died, that there were conditions attached to his inheritance. The world those conditions had been triggered by my assessment of events over the past year. I told him the July disbursement was on hold. The world tilted sideways. I told him none of this was designed to punish him and all of it was designed to ensure that I could live the rest of my life without wondering whether people who were supposed to love me were managing me for access to my estate. The world was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, I didn't know Mum did that. I said, she did. He said, the disbursement in July. I said, on hold, yes. He said, they were planning to. I said, I know. Another silence. The lake was flat. A boat crossed it in the distance, leaving a white line that slowly heeled over. He said, what did you say at the party? The world tilted sideways. I said right then, I didn't cause a scene. I never cause scenes. He put his coffee down. He looked at his hands. He is my son. The world tilted his mother's forehead and my jaw and something behind his eyes that is entirely his own. I watched him sitting there doing something difficult. The world which was arriving at the version of that night that was true instead of the version that had been easier to carry. He said, she shouldn't have said that. I said, no. He said, the world should have said something at the time. I said, yes. He said, I'm sorry, Dad, but I didn't say anything for a moment. We sat with that for a while. The lake was still doing its thing. The tatara on the hillside above the house was catching the February light and turning it silver. I said, I know you are. The what happened after that conversation took time. I'm not going to compress it into something tidy because it wasn't tidy. Christopher spoke to Vivienne. The whirl exactly what was said and I have not asked. What I know is that she rang me 3 days after my visit to Top. She did not sound warm and calibrated. The world tilted sideways. She sounded like a person who has had something they thought was invisible be made very visible. She said she was sorry for what she'd said at the party. I said I appreciated that. The world tilted sideways. She said she hadn't meant it the way it came out. I said I had heard it the way it came out, and that was what I had to work with. She didn't say anything to that for a moment. Then she said, "The world tilted sideways, the trust." I said, "That's not a conversation I'm going to have with you directly. That's between Christopher and Bernadette and me." She said, "Right." The world tilted sideways. I said, "Vienne, I've never asked for anything from you except basic respect. I'm not difficult to be around. I don't demand things. I don't interfere." The world tilted sideways. "I helped you build your life without expectation, and I would have kept doing that. What I'm not willing to do is pretend that what happened at that party was nothing, because it wasn't nothing. And you know it wasn't nothing." She said, "I know." That was all she said. "I know." We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, and I sat in the kitchen for a while and thought about whether I felt better. The world tilted sideways. Marginally. The way you feel better after you have said the true thing instead of the easy thing. It's not relief exactly. It's more like alignment. Like something interior clicking back into its proper position. It is winter now. The world tilted sideways, and I'm 67 years old, and I am sitting in my kitchen in Hamilton with the butter-colored walls and my tea going cold. The tea has moved on from the kawaii, and I won't see it again until August. The world tilted sideways. I still mow my own lawn. Christopher and I have dinner once a month. Sometimes he comes here. Sometimes I drive to Top and we eat somewhere on the lake and we talk about ordinary things. The world joins us occasionally. It is careful between us. It is not warm the way I once hoped it might be warm. But it is honest in a way it never was before. The word find I can sit in that honesty without wanting to leave. That is something. The trust is doing what it was designed to do. Bernadette manages it without fuss. The world tiltisbursement has been reinstated subject to a modified timeline that Christopher accepted without objection. That is also something. Found in the filing cabinet last month. A letter Margaret had written, not to me. To herself. It was in her handwriting on the paper she used for things she wanted to keep a single page undated. The word to her clear even script is kind. He is too kind sometimes. But kindness is not the same as softness, and I think he will remember that when he needs to. I read that letter 3 times. The world tilted sideways. I sat with it in the kitchen for an hour. Then I put it back in the folder under the will, under the trust documents. The world tilted sideways. Under everything she built to protect the person she loved from the people who might mistake him for someone they could manage. I put it back, and I thought about her sitting here writing it. The world tilted sideways, probably in the morning when I was still asleep, the light just coming in from the east, the butter walls going gold. I thought she knew. She always knew. Even then. The world, I should have married her sooner. And I should have listened more, and I should have told her every day how remarkable she was. I did tell her most days. Not every day, but most days. The world tilted sideways. That is the thing about long marriages. Most days is what you have to give, and most days is what sustains you. And on the days you missed, you just have to make your peace with that and carry on. The world, my peace with it. I carry on. If you are sitting in your own kitchen somewhere reading this, let me say something that is not dramatic and is not a lesson designed for a poster. The world tilted sideways. Be suspicious of warmth that arrives on a schedule. Be suspicious of people who treat you well when there is an audience and differently when there isn't. The world, to be suspicious of anyone who makes you feel like a guest in your own life. The world, if you have a partner who loves you with their whole practical, careful, brilliant heart, pay attention to what they see that you don't. They are usually seeing clearly. You are usually too close. The world tilted sideways clearly. I am still learning to see the way she did. Most mornings with my tea and the kawaii tree outside, I sit here and I try. I think I'm getting closer. That's enough. That's all I need it to be.